Now that we have this HDR tone layer in our original document, we can really get creative with how we use this layer. One of the things that we might want to experiment with, for example, is to have a couple of different HDR layers. Let's go ahead and duplicate this layer by pressing Command or Control J, and let's name this top layer HDR-Softlight. Here what we can do then is apply a blending mode to this top layer. And let's do that by clicking on our blending mode option and then by choosing soft light. Next, let's turn off that underlying layer so that we can see how this looks. Here we have it, our before and then our after. So by using HDR and then by blending this with soft light, if we zoom in a little bit, we can see we come up with this pretty interesting aesthetic. Here's that before and then after. Well, a lot of times when you're working with soft light, you may oversaturate the blacks or make the blacks in the image too deep. Well, to fix that, we'll click on our adjustment layer icon and then select curves. And here I'm simply going to brighten up those curves by going in and bringing up those blacks there. Well, I want this to only affect the underlying layer. We can then click on this icon here to create a layer clipping mask. This will show us a little bit more of a subtle brightening. Here we have that before and after working on those shadows. If you need more, simply click and drag these up in order to get perhaps even a little bit more detail there. Again, before and after. So this overall effect now is really subtle. Here it is before and then after. We still have a little bit of that glow, but it's not over the top. Well, let's say though that we want some of that original interesting HDR look. Well, we now have this other layer. It's just our regular HDR layer, no blending mode. We'll turn that layer on, and you'll start to see that what you can do here is target this layer and then control the opacity and bring this in exactly how far you want it. So now here's that before and after with this adjustment here. When we look at all of these adjustments together, we now have before and then after. So really it's a combination of that soft light blending and also a regular layer on lower opacity, which leads to a pretty interesting result. We can also, of course, go to that soft light layer, lower the opacity there, bring in a little bit less contrast. The whole point here is to get you to begin to think about HDR toning really as a starting point. If you want your images to look interesting, you don't want someone to look at it and say, oh yeah, you used HDR toning, nice. Rather, you want to disguise what you've done. You want to hide your tracks. You want someone to look at a photograph and just say, wow, I don't know what you did, but that is cool. That's interesting. That's engaging. So again, we can start to think about that this way. Now there are other things, of course, that we can do as well. Let's turn off our top two layers for a moment. Go back to this HDR layer and really crank it up. Bring it all back. Well, another way that we can, of course, work with this is with masking. Here I'll go ahead and hold down Option or Alt and then click on the Add Layer Mask icon. Now when you hold down Option or Alt, that then creates a mask filled with black. So in this case, it's concealing the entirety of that HDR effect. Next, we'll grab our brush tool, and then we'll go ahead and paint with white. I'm going to paint with white with a pretty low opacity here. I want to have a brush that's nice and soft, pretty small size there. And I'll go ahead and I'm just going to click and paint across the jeans here. Let's say I want to bring out some of the detail here of the jeans, because this photograph happens to be for this guy's sponsor. And the clothing is important here, so we'll just bring out some detail of the jeans. We'll also do that in the hair. Again, just painting this effect into a couple of areas in the photograph and on the face. Just add a bit of that edginess there to the face. We can paint this into different degrees and bring it in perhaps on the train tracks, just a little bit over there and over here. Again, just bringing in some subtlety of this effect. And let's examine how we've done. Well, here we have it, before and then after, just painting this into particular areas to bring out a highlight or to bring out a particular aspect of a photograph. Now this approach can be a ton of fun, because what you're doing here is you're taking the best of this HDR tone layer and you're just bringing it into these particular areas, bringing out some of these tones and really making this come to life. Now of course you can also exaggerate this even further. Make your brush bigger, crank up your opacity there, and I'm just going to paint now with 100%. And I'm cranking up the opacity simply by pressing 0 on the keyboard. That takes the opacity to 100. And here, I'm bringing a ton into the guy, and we can see a lot of it there on him. Let's look. Here's that before and then after. Well, at this juncture, I have a lot of really nice detail on him, but I want a little bit more in the background. Well, the great thing about a mask is you can control the density of the black the density of that which is concealing the effect in the other areas. If you go to your mask panel, here you can go ahead and lower that density, and as I lower that, I'm bringing more and more into that background. So now when we look at our before and after, we can see primarily it's affecting the guy here, but it's also affecting the background a little bit. And in this case, we may want to lower the opacity so that we're going for this effect where we have a lot on the guy, a little bit on the background, and now here's that before and then after. Again, it has that HDR aesthetic, but no one's going to know how you created it. Let's zoom in so we can evaluate. Here we have it before and then after. So the whole point here with this movie is, again, to get you to begin to think about working with HDR toning, but not to stop there. Rather, to begin to experiment with how you can use this toned aesthetic and then combine it in with your original document in order to come up with some creative results that literally you could not have accomplished any other way.